where do you see, right, these new professions being born, and what's the opportunity for more people taking advantage of this digital economy?
I think that's a very good point. And I think we should actually focus on the immediate priority, which is going to be the COVID crisis, both in terms of the human tragedy, but also on the economic consequences that will follow. And we're in a situation where unemployment all over the world is trending upwards, where you know, a number of companies are disappearing and more will disappear. A number of companies have managed to survive because of government bailouts and furlough schemes and the likes of the UK and elsewhere in the US, support that's been given to those who've been furloughed or made temporarily unemployed, if you like. However, at some point those schemes are going to end, and unfortunately many people are going to be left without a job when in the next few months perhaps. So not just the next few months, but next year or two could be very challenging for many. And it's going to be very important for our policymakers, for our politicians and regulators to look at the ways in which we can deploy emerging technologies such as AI, which covers machine learning and deep learning, but also the technologies that 5G will avail, like augmented reality, virtual reality, etc., more Internet of Things areas, to create new businesses and new whole new industries that don't exist today, to create employment. And sometimes I've had like a researcher in AI write to me and say, oh, how's an AI company creating more AI companies going to create more jobs? Well, actually, it's not just the programmers, it's not just the machine learning developers. You're going to have marketers, you're going to have salespeople, you're going to have HR,
data specialists, right? Data, who preparing data, right?
You're going to have DevOps, backend. You know, Google, for instance, has a huge number of employees, and they're not just machine learning engineers or one type of developer, for instance. Or
right, Amazon hiring, right, a large spectrum of professions, actually.
Correct. So if you go back and chart, actually, the employment growth that occurred since 2012, which is when deep learning really took off, arguably, when AlexNet, which were a team, which was Jeff Hinton's PhD team, or students from Jeff Hinton of Toronto University, won the ImageNet competition. And ImageNet is like the equivalent of the World Cup of computer vision. And they destroyed the opposition using deep learning and GPUs, graphical processing units. And that's when the likes of Google and Facebook, etc., got very excited about deep learning and really started to get involved into it. And arguably that was a key moment when deep learning really took off, even though it had been around before then. But then you look at the employment growth in Google, in Facebook, in Amazon, in Alibaba, for instance, another example, companies that are very heavy on AI. And if it was true that AI just is going to lead to unemployment with complete automation, then these companies should not have increased their employment, and yet they did dramatically. And the paradox is the unemployment since that period has come from the legacy companies that have been slow on adopting digital and other technology and AI, for instance. So it's been the companies that have been more and more stuck in the past. And I remember my business school professor in strategy at London Business School, who was at Stanford, did his MBA at Stanford, and he reminded me when the glasses, when you look at in the frames of your glasses, those who wear glasses, we often look on what's immediately in front of us, and we forget what's here in the corner of our eye. A good example that he gave was the advent of the calculator. Until that point, people used slide rules for calculation, for calculating things. And the slide rule had been there for hundreds of years in universities, in schools, in industry. And the slide rule manufacturers were really focused on each other as competitors and almost making a brass finish. So the other made a chrome polish finish, etc. And the calculator came out here, the likes of Casio, Japanese, etc. And it was here in the corner, and they didn't really view it as a competitor or take it seriously. And within 2 years, they were all gone. They were all wiped out by the calculator. And we have a similar situation here, whereby I believe that around 2022 to 2023, as 5G really takes off, and we see more and more AI come through on the edge, etc., and more rapid digital transformation, those companies that are laggards are probably going to increasingly disappear. But we need to try and create incentives for new startups that can come up and grow rapidly to create employment, and especially in the wake of many people being unemployed now, and over the next year or so as a consequence of COVID-19 and the economic consequences that followed. We have to view technology as a way to go out there and generate new business opportunities and do things in a more efficient way without making the same mistakes that we were making 20, 30 years ago with heavy industry. We don't need to make them again. We can find ways to optimize renewable energy, to use AI and other new technologies and things like battery storage technologies, which is still relatively embryonic, but use that to enhance the R&D and future capabilities in these areas so that we can create more and more industry 4.0 technology companies that are more and more efficient and bring efficiencies to the entire value chain.
In terms of skills, in terms of, where people can help themselves preparing, right? Do you see any, again, low-hanging fruits, low entry barrier into professions that would lead them to prosperity later?
I think there's another very important point, which is hyper-personalization. Personalization has been a holy grail for many businesses for a long time, but many have kind of struggled to get there. And as you try and create differentiation strategy, especially in the modern era, remember now the young generation that are out there, whether they be TikTokers or Instagrammers or whatever, this is a generation that increasingly don't remember a world that wasn't digital. It's a generation that was born and grew up with the internet, that for them, the convenience of an Amazon or doing a Google search or whatever, or using social media is second nature to them. It's something they were born with or grew up with. And this is a trend that even with COVID-19, for instance, my mother adopted e-commerce. She didn't use it before. E-commerce, and now she does
this digital transformation at personal level. Yeah, totally.
Correct. And now she feels very comfortable with e-commerce and is going to continue with it. So increasingly, businesses have to understand they really have to work with data, become data-driven, and use that data to personalize services or products. They can do much more sophisticated segmentation, for instance, than they could before, and really get to drill into customer segments and what's driving those customers and what kind of strategies they need to adopt there. And that's for services, that's for products, and also on their own operations internally in terms of how they can make things more efficient and understand what problems they face and what are the costs of those problems, so that they can then understand how to target them better. So that's increasingly, I think, going to be the optimistic and real world use cases of machine learning going forwards.
Perfect. An opportunity for people who are thinking and rethinking their own life strategies, right? And even changing professions nowadays. Imtiaz, thank you so very much. We talked about future, we talked about present state of machine learning and AI, and thank you for educating us, right, on where things are. Thank you for describing the bright future. And I appreciate your time here. So I will link your information because you are enormous source of articles and wisdom, collective wisdom on Twitter, particularly LinkedIn. So I'll definitely want to invite our audience to follow you and to get more of these pearls of wisdom from you. Thank you so very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.